Hey guys, welcome to this video. So this video is about a topic which is quite confusing for a lot of entrepreneurs. Now on my different social media channels I keep emphasizing on the fact that technology is the future. So if you are an entrepreneur, if you are anyone, you should at least know basic technology, you should at least know how to write a program, you should know at least one language, at least the basics of it, because if not you will be out of the league in future, because future is all about technology. But a lot of questions then come to people is that they find it challenging of how to learn a new language. I have seen my friends who have been learning a language from the last 1 year and they are still not able to build a project out of that language. So learning a language is extremely useful. Number one thing, you can build your own projects, your own apps, you can do data analytics using it. So it's very useful to learn it, but people find it challenging on how to learn it. So in this video I'm going to cover off how I learn different languages. Now to give a bit of background about myself, I was a complete non-tech person, I was a complete non-coder. So I did my engineering in civil engineering. So you will know that it's a complete non-tech field. But as I moved on, in fact I learned most of the coding that I do today after my college days. So today I can learn any language, any new language in 7 to 14 days. And as a fact that just when I'm doing this video right now, I am building a Python project, and Python is a new language that I had learned in the last 7 to 8 days. So it took me only 7-8 days to catch up with the language, to learn with it, and now I have almost built half of my project and build the other half of the project also soon. So I'll tell you how I go about learning language, how I optimize my speed of learning a language to 7 to 14 days, and how you can do it too. So the first critical thing that you have to remember, guys, is implementation. Yes, a lot of people, what they do is that they keep learning a language from books, from courses, but they do not make something out of it. They do not create a project, they do not build an app, they just learn it. So that is the wrong approach. You should not be in a learning phase. Just to give you a comparison, think of Virat Kohli. He's a great batsman, right? Now imagine Virat Kohli just learning how to play cricket from various books and watching videos, but he never plays. Will he be a good cricketer? No, right? He'll have to go out on the ground, he'll have to play, he'll have to implement whatever he's learning through videos and through books. He'll have to implement it on the ground, and that's how he became great. The same thing is with learning any other thing. The same thing is with learning language. Unless you build projects while you are learning, you will not be able to be a great programmer or a good programmer, I should say. So now before beginning, let me just give you another very important fact that I hope I know many of you would not have known this, that all languages are same. Confused? But this is true. All languages in the world, be it Python, Java, Android, whatever you call it, R, C, all languages are same. If you learn one language, you have just learned all the languages. The only difference between these languages is the syntax. Now what do I mean by syntax? Syntax means the way of writing things in each language. Now each language has different ways of writing a command or writing a statement. For example, in language 1, I can write 1 plus 2 and it gives me the answer as 3. But in language 2, to sum two numbers, I will have to write like this: sum of 1 comma 2. Then it will give me the answer as 3. So you see, both are same. Both, if I do 1 plus 2 will give me 3. Just the way of writing is different. So when I say that I am learning a new language, I mean that I'm learning the way of writing things in that language. I already know the basics, I already know how to do 1 plus 2, but now I'm learning how to write that in this language. So I think now you have understood a gist of it, that all languages are same. What's different is the syntax part of it. Okay, now let me just come here. Second part is when you are learning your first language. I am assuming that you have not learned any language, right? The first language is hard to learn. The first language is always hard to learn. It can take you 2 months to learn. For me, it took me 1.5 months to learn my first language. which was actually R. I learned a bit of C before, but the first actual language that I learned was R, and it took me 1 month to learn R. Now, the first, what do you need to learn this first language? Let me just write the resources here. The number one thing that you need is book. You can get any good book, any good rated book on Amazon. Number two is you need a course, a video course. I mean, you can take it from Udemy or any other website out there. The third thing that you need is, the most important thing that you need is a project. I'll come to it. And fourth is Google. Now let me tell you, how do you use these while learning a language. So for your first language, remember this, it's hard because you do not know the basics. Right now you do not know 1 plus 2 also in any language. So once you learn it in this language, you can learn it, you can implement it in any other language just by knowing the way of writing, right? So the first thing that you have to do is get a good book and subscribe to an online course. Now why do you need a book while you are subscribing to a course? You need a book because a course is generally of 4 hours, 5 hours, 12 hours. It does not cover everything about the language, while a book covers everything in detail about the language. So it's important that you read that book because this is your first language. You are learning a lot of things for the first time. It's important that you get your basics clear of how languages work. For that you need a good book, and keep making notes out of that book. Read that book religiously, every sentence, solve the problems in the book. Once you do that and you do this course, you will be ready to actually write code and implement it. Now, what do you need to implement it is a project. Now, a lot of people ask me, how do we get projects? We are not freelancers, we cannot take projects. We are not so good that we can take projects. Don't take projects. Imagine projects. For example, right now when I was learning Python, I imagined a project for myself, which was an expense tracker for myself. Where I imagined was that I will build a program where I can upload my bank statement, and it will, in output, that program will give me what are my expense categories, like how much am I what do you call it, man? What's my expense in e-commerce? What's my expense in medical? What my medical expense is? What my e-commerce expense is? What my food expense is? How much do I invest every month? So it will give me monthly detailed statistics of my bank statement. And then going further, I can implement machine learning. I am implementing machine learning, time series analysis to see how they will look in the future and set targets for it so that I can achieve the future numbers in terms of savings, in terms of expenses. So I got confused between expense and expend, sorry for that. So yeah, so I imagined a personal project for myself. I did not take a project. I am building this project, and this is not something I'll create a startup out of. This is something that I'm doing it for fun. So if you are learning Android, when I learned Android, I created an app, an alarm clock app for myself with different alarm tones for each week of the day, and whenever the alarm rings, a beautiful quote comes on the screen. I built it for myself. So that's how you have to build projects. You have to imagine projects. So whatever you are learning, you can imagine very simple projects also, like a mathematical calculator you have to build. So while you are learning any language, just the first thing that you have to do is imagine a simple project that you have to do. Because once you have that project, you will have a goal in your mind that you have to build this. Then you will learn it in a much more structured way. You will start doing that project. Whenever you are stuck, you can go back to the book or courses. That's how you do it. The number fourth very important thing which a lot of you do not use is Google. Google is your friend, it's not your enemy. So just to give you an example, for writing the code that I have wrote till now in Python in the last 7 days, I did more than 100 Google searches. Just imagine, more than 100. So for every line of code that I was writing, I was actually doing 1 or 2 Google search because I was getting stuck or I wanted to know more about that. Google has everything. You just have to know the right thing to ask. And how will you know the right thing to ask? By reading the book and this course. Because once you know the basics, you will actually know how to actually, what do you actually call this thing. So now if I write a statement like this, for I in range 1 to 3, a Python statement, if I write like this is a wrong statement, right? So you won't be able to tell because you do not know the basics of what this statement is and what's the problem. So how do I actually write it on Google? How do I actually ask Google to correct this statement, right? You won't know this. But once you know the basics of it, that this is a for loop and this is a range function, then you can go to Google and write for loop range function error. and then Google will tell you that the problem is that these brackets are wrong, this should have been parenthesis, and this is not a colon, this should be a comma, and this is how you write a statement, right? So it's important that you know the basics, and Google is your friend. Always keep Googling, it's very important. Now the third important thing is that, so when you are learning a language, there are basics for language which are common. There are some basics which are common among all the languages which are used in any of the products or services that you build. So let me write those basics here. The for loop, the if else statement, the data frames, variables, declaring variables, types of variables, and then there can be other things like the while loop and other things also, right? The different libraries which are there. Okay, now whenever you are learning any language, right now we are talking about the first language, but any language whether you are learning, these things are common in all the languages. So actually when I tell you that I am learning a language, I mean that I am learning to write these basics functions in different forms in each language. So like I told, 1 plus, so these are all like functions like these, 1 plus 2 is equals to 3, but in one language you write it as 1 plus 2, in one language you write it as sum 1 comma 2. For example, in Python I write this for loop as for I in range 1 to 2, but in R I write it differently, for I in 1 is to 3. There is no range function in R. So both of these mean the same thing, but the way of writing is different. Here parenthesis is used, here square brackets are used. So when I say that I am learning a new language, what I mean is that I am learning how to write these how to write this for loop in different ways in both the languages. So these things is something which is very basic. So whenever you are learning your first language, spend time on learning these. Spend time on writing algorithms using this, the for loop, the if else statement, the data frames which are the different types of data frames and data objects which are there in that language, the variables and how do you declare variables in that language, the while loop, the libraries of that language. Once you know this, you can learn any language, because now it's only a matter of learning how to write these things in different language. These are the basics. So whenever you are learning a language, always focus on these things of how do you actually write code using these statements and functions. Now when you are learning your second language, you do not need all these things. While you are learning your second language, you only need to learn the syntax. You can learn it online. For example, in Python I learned it through Tutorials Point. You do not even need to subscribe to a course, Tutorials Point. You need a project and then you need Google. Everything is same, just the syntax is different. Now again, I told you what syntax is, right? You have learned how to actually, you have learned your first language, and by I mean you have learned your first language, I mean that you have learned how to use these statements and these functions and all these things in the first language. Because once you know how to write these in one language, you will know, it will be very easy for you to learn how to write this in a different language, and that's what called syntax. Just to give an example, for example, if I am giving an example of the languages that we speak. English, there are a lot of languages, English, Hindi, Spanish, Chinese, right? But say for example, if I want to go to some place which I do not know and I want to ask the direction for it, what do? I ask a question, right? That in English, for example, I ask where is the question. In Hindi I tell him वहाँ पे जाने का क्या रास्ता है. Sorry, in English I ask him where is the direction for that place, and in Hindi I ask him कि वहाँ जाने का क्या रास्ता है. So similarly in different languages you have to ask a question. You do not ask him an answer, you do not tell him an answer, you ask a question. So that asking a question is a basic thing that you should know. So for example, if you want to get to a place, you want to ask a direction, you have to ask a question. If you know you have to ask a question, Now how do you ask a question, how do you say a question in different languages? You can learn it very easily. In Chinese you can just learn the 4 words through which you can ask a question. You can just Google that how do I ask a question in Chinese. The same thing is with languages. These are basic things like asking questions, answers. These are all such basic things. So once you know that, then writing it in different languages is very easy. You can ask Google, you can you can just see an online resource for syntax. So by syntax I mean the way of writing things. For example, this is English. In English 1 plus 2 is 3, but in Chinese sum of 1 comma 2 is 3. So it's just a writing difference, right? So I hope that through this video, guys, you have got that basic knowledge of how languages work, because people are not able to learn languages because they do not have the basic knowledge of how languages work. So languages are all the same. I'll just summarize it. Languages are all same. So these languages are similar to the languages we speak, just that these are the languages for computer, and the languages we speak is the languages for human. Rest, everything is same. Everything is same. So all languages are same, just that the way of writing in that language is different. Now you do not speak. For example, for our language I'll say the way of speaking is different, but here the way of writing is different, because computers don't speak. You have to write, right? The way of writing is different, and that way of writing is called syntax. 1 plus 2 3, sum of 1 2 3. These are two different forms of writing the same thing. So these are syntax. How do you learn a first language? First thing, it's always difficult to learn the first language because you'll have to learn the basics. Buy a good book, subscribe to a good course, think of a good project, and consider Google as your friend. And when you start learning, focus on these basics: for loop, if else, for and while loop, if else statement, data frames, variables, how do you declare variables, and the libraries which are available for this. What are libraries? You learn it once you Google it. Okay, so once you learn these things for this language, now you'll be able to learn any language very swiftly without even a book or a course, just by seeing how do you write these things in different languages. So that's what is called syntax. So when you're learning your second language, you can just learn the syntax of writing these, build a project that you imagine yourself, and consider Google as your friend. So guys, this is how you learn a language. This is how I learned a language. So this is how I learned R. So for R, what I did was I took a course in Coursera for R, and I bought a book for R through Amazon. But R is basically used in data analytics, data science. So if you want to build your own app and projects, then I won't tell you R. So you can learn languages like Python, you can learn Java, you can learn HTML, you can learn Android. Is actually, for learning Android development, you'll have to first learn Java itself. So a good start to learning any language are Python and Java. You can start learning by learning Python and Java, and this is how you learn. Remember, this is the two most important things on this board right now are these two. The number one is basics. This is one thing that you have to remember. You should be able to understand the meanings and how to write code using these things. And then projects are the second most important thing on the board. Unless you implement it, you won't be able to learn. So guys, I hope that through this video you have really understood the nuances which are involved in different languages. It's not something which is very complicated. Once you learn the basics of how languages function, you can learn. You have seen that there are people who can speak 10-15 languages, right? Chinese people, there are people who can speak Chinese, Japanese, English, Hindi, and a lot of other languages, right? In India only, you see in general people actually speak at least 2 or 3 languages. I speak Hindi and English. A person from South speaks Hindi, English, Telugu, right? So why can't you just learn this at least one language? It's pretty simple, right? It's pretty simple. It's just like the language we speak. The only difference is that instead of speaking, you have to write it. And every language has a different syntax, way of writing, right? It's like it's there in the language that we speak. So guys, this is how you learn a language, and I would say that if you want to learn it, start by these two, Python or Java. Start by Python, I would say, because if you ask me questions, I can actually tell you about what resources you can use to learn Python. Start by Python using using the resources that I told you for the first language, and learning these basics. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I hope you will start learning a language, because without technology there is no future. You are missing out on a major thing. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.